Well, welcome once again. This is the Doctor of Digital with the Doctor of Digital podcast. The purpose of the show is to transform your business and life with education and inspiration. I introduce busy business leaders to trends in business, technology, and marketing to highlight people you should know. Did you know that only 3% of the Latin American consumers trust traditional advertisers, but a whopping 78% trust recommendations from family and people? This presents a unique opportunity for brands entering the Latin American e-commerce market, building strong organizational and community-driven strategies to build consumer trust and loyalty. Understanding cultural nuances is crucial. From humor and visuals to preferred payment methods, tailoring marketing approaches to each Latin American country is essential to success. Do you want to understand the growing Latin American e-commerce market? During this episode, we'll do a deep dive into the changes and hot topics in e-commerce and Latin America to understand the market and how to navigate the unique dynamics of the field. By the end of this episode, you will be better equipped to know what to do, and I encourage you to contact my special guest, who is an e-commerce and Latin American expert. Please welcome my guest, Ramiro Velasco. Ramiro, thanks for being on the show. Welcome today.
Thank you so much for having me. And, I'm sure you get this a lot, but you have the smoothest voice I've ever heard in my life. So pleasure to be here.
Well, I'll slip you that $20 later for all the compliments. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you saying so. People are always curious about your background. So I'm wondering if you have some sort of story. How did you get into this field in the first place? Tell us a little bit about that.
Do you believe in luck?
I do sometimes.
It was pure happenstance. So I happened to live all over the world. I was lucky enough, my father's job took me, lived in 10 countries. One of those points, I decided I wanted to be an engineer. So I went to the UK to study engineering. Terrible decision. I love the UK. I don't like engineering. Came out as a mechanical engineer, very happy with myself, being like, oh, I'm a clever guy. And lived in Indonesia for a year. And then I want to go back to Mexico. Well, obviously, my family was like, what are you doing? No opportunities. Oh, my God, like the danger. Yeah. I was like, listen, I want to be in my country. I like it. I've been abroad for most of my life. I want to be in there. So I come back. And let me tell you, engineering jobs do not pay well in Mexico.
Okay.
So I come back and I'm like looking for a job and I'm like, oh, this is bad. And luckily, I speak English, natively. So I went, all right, what jobs require English? Because that's going to be better paid. And by pure luck, I landed at an Amazon agency, right? I went to the interview and it was like a good vibe. I talked to my then employer, and I was like, all right, if this is the general work ambiance, the work environment, I can work here. I don't care what we do. I'm going to have a good time here. So came in and learned e-commerce and then went, wait, I'm really good at this. It was pure luck of landing in a spot that really fit with me. And of course you'll say there was micro decisions along the way or whatever, but ultimately I came here and to Mexico, and I found a market that was developing in the US, because this was 6-7 years ago. When it then came to, all right, let's look at e-commerce in Mexico, because it started by, I want to sell things. Yeah, and I'm here and it's going to be easier. I went, wait, it's kind of hard. It's kind of hard for, other sellers to sell in Mexico. And that's where I found a market niche. And I think this lines up perfectly with my philosophy, which is if you want to start a business, get really good at something and you'll find market opportunities. I think any of us in any industry are going, people are doing this wrong. If we're doing and then it's just a matter of, can I do it right and bring value to other people? So I believe, get to that point. My father always told me, you want to open a restaurant? Cool. Go work at a restaurant. Yeah. Go work at a restaurant for a bunch, and then figure out what they're doing wrong that you can do better, and then do that. So, I'd like to say it was pure luck. Sure, there's a lot of work, and
it happens. When you say this has been happening over several years now, could you say some of the changes, because they're like in anything in technology, there are a lot of changes. What would you say are some of the changes that you've seen and bigger changes?
So in Mexico, specifically to Mexico, or just e-commerce in general?
Well, what you do, and I think maybe in
Okay,
Mexico, because I think people are
so
interested in the market. Certainly, it's growing.
totally. So I think what we're seeing in Latin America is a mirror of what we saw in the US, over the past
No.
8 years. So um, there was a transition of like, do I want to order online? Does it get to my house? How do I know that it's not going to get stolen? How that it's going to get here? There's this trust period, which we absolutely went through. Now we're sort of moving out of the distrust period into the
Mm.
slow adaptation of online shopping. So I love that you mentioned in your intro payment methods. Payment methods were hugely a huge barrier to Mexican e-commerce
No.
because we're a cash-based economy, right?
Wow.
So a lot of consumers are getting paid in cash. Uh, and it's like, all right, how do I get this cash? I can't put it into my computer to get it to Amazon. So Mercado Libre, Amazon's competition and the leading marketplace here in Mexico, went, don't worry, we got you. Made deals with Oxxo, made local like 7-Eleven type shops, so that
Mm.
you can pay at the corner shop. And they started coming out with payment solutions. So we have 670 million people in Latin America, and Mexico's 123 million people digitizing their shopping habits. So we're seeing a lot of what happened in the US before, which is, top selling products still say 30-day money back guarantee in your listings. And it's like, you can't say that. Well, there's a distrust of you because people don't know you and they're buying online. So in general, just marketing. And I love this other thing that you said, which is Mexico and Latin American countries really do listen to recommendations of their peers
No.
for
Yeah.
buying things. So being good, like having a good product right now is really important because then they go, oh, that's really neat. Oh, I got it on, online or whatever. Cool, I'll go buy it. And influencer marketing is massive because again, we do go a lot by social proof. And I think culturally it's just like we're distrustful. So it's someone else tells me it's good. I'll write it, then I'll try it out. So
Gotcha.
influencer marketing, off-platform marketing, and the slow digitization of shopping consumer habits are all massive movers in the industry right now.
Would those be some of the things that you would say are the hot topics? That is
Yeah,
what the US has been doing, and then the payment methods, and then also the personal the peer-to-peer type of recommendations. Those are the hot
exactly.
trends that are going. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Without getting into the bureaucracy of actually selling in the country, which anyone that sells online and is trying to sell in Mexico knows is a nightmare.
Hmm. And could you say something about, I think, in reference to the differences between the different types of Latin American cultures, right? So it's not all Spanish, it's not all Hispanic, but there are some differences, right, within there.
Absolutely. Like if you're coming in and you're trying to sell like just one size fits all, it's probably not going to work. I had funnily enough, some of this comes a little bit intuitively. I was talking to someone that's trying to get into Latin America last week, and they do clothing. And he was like, I know what sells in the US, so can I send you that? And I was like, sure, but can you send it a couple sizes smaller? Because we're smaller people.
Mm.
And he tried, he was like, oh yeah, like the eating habits. And I'm like, no, no, I mean, I'm 5'10" and I'm above average. Like we're a smaller people here. So that's just a small sort of tidbit of like how culturally we're different, or like as a market we're different. We have different words for things. In Mexico, you say alberca. In Colombia, you say piscina. Like, and it's like if I go to Colombia and I have the same, sort of language, it feels a little bit foreign. It feels a little bit like there's a disconnect. Let alone Brazil, right? Like, I'm not gonna go in with Spanish, descriptions into a Portuguese-speaking country, but yeah, shopping habits are hugely different in sort of like the marketing aspect. I think on the shopping aspect, we're very similar in the sense that we are primarily cash-based, lower purchasing power countries that are used to things like monthly installment payments, um, which we can apply across Latin America to get better sales and so on. So yeah,
It makes a significant difference because that's one of the advantages I think I've had, excuse me, on both the West and East Coast. So on the East Coast, there are Puerto Rican, Cuban, Dominican. On the West Coast, then you're getting Mexican, Central America, and South American. And you can see
um,
vast difference.
That is so. I had never thought of that. You're so right. We're so ingrained with American culture is so universal. We get it all over. And then maybe I'm speaking from a personal space because I do exist in this like the Anglosphere of influence, right? Like ultimately, my life, the news I consume are mostly in English, like the everything. But so you're used to hearing about like Mexican Americans and then like
Definitely.
Dominican Americans, and it's like I never made that. Yeah, you're right. Like that's like New York going crazy, and then that's like California going. You're oh my god, that's so interesting.
Yeah, and I guess just the advantage of where I've been, just I grew
Yeah,
up on the East Coast and then I spent time on the West, and you can see that the patterns are very different. Also,
yeah,
it's just what you're exposed to and what you know and what you're aware of in your surroundings.
yeah, yeah.
When you
That's so
think of
good.
a business person wanting to do business in the Latin American market, are there certain things that you would recommend? So, I mean, what would a typical business owner who's listening would like to know? How do I break into the Latin American market, or how do I get a bigger presence there?
Okay, now you're speaking my language. We have a couple of things. This is a part where I do speak about what I specifically do, what my business does. But um, getting into Latin America in general is hard. We have very protectionist policies in several of the biggest marketplaces. Mexico, for
Mhm.
example, does not allow for you to sell in Mexico efficiently without an RFC, without a Mexican tax ID. Okay, cool. So now you have to go through the whole process of finding either a distributor, which is sort of the role we play, or a local business entity, which is a nightmare to get from the bureaucracy. Like I had a very hard time every time. I have a very hard time every time I open up a new business entity. You have places like Brazil now up to 40% import tax on the way in, and it's like, excuse me, and there's ways around it, but you have to be clever. So for Brazil, there's special trade economic zones, from my understanding, where you can import the product, modify it in some way, and minimize those tariffs. Okay, neat. In Mexico, what we do is we do everything by the book in a way that we can deduct all the costs on the way in, which makes it just the margin a lot better. Also, we take advantage of the crossover zones to make sure that we're getting the fastest deliveries and so on. Because honestly, uh, traditionally, when you get this question, people that aren't in Latin America will say, "Well, just use the North American remote fulfillment program for Amazon, and then Mercado Libre, they have global selling, drop shipping." Keep your stock in the US and send it to Mexico whenever you get an order. As consumers, we know I'm not going to wait 7 days for your product to get here if someone else can get it to me. I don't care if it's a little bit more expensive. If I get it next day, those 6 days are worth something to me,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
So, the first thing, how do I get into Latin America? Market research. Look at what competitors are doing, look at what volumes are doing, and see if it's a market fit. You're not looking for a one-to-one volume from your American sales to your or European sales because they're also very strong, like the pan-European programs. They're not. You're not looking for a one-to-one. You're looking at how difficult would it be to me? Would it be for me to dominate this category because I expect this market to keep growing 50% year over year for the next 5 years? Okay, cool. Does that make sense? Cool. Does the yes? Okay, cool. Do the margins make sense? Can
Yeah.
I eat in that price point? Consider I have taxes to pay, I have duties to pay, I have freight to pay, right?
Right.
Does, does that make sense still? If it does, cool. Now let's figure out how to sell it. Okay, but like the very first step has to be sort of what's the scope? What can I expect to get? And how difficult would it be to get there? And yeah, then ideally you come talk to us because it's easier.
Yeah. That's always the question. And, with a lot of people, I think you wouldn't necessarily have all the inside and the contacts. So then I often hear from people, it's like, well, I've tried this person, I've tried that person, and it hasn't worked out. And so they've had some bad experiences. What would you say are some of the differentiating factors if a person was working with you or they would be consulting with you for your expertise?
Okay. So I went through the miserable experience of setting up a business entity for the first time with foreign partners. So all my partners on my business are American, and
Okay.
that involved getting apostille documents, copies of their passports, apostille translated copies of like certificate information, tax returns, like a lot of really not personal but private information. They're
Sure.
like, do I want to be sharing all this? I had to go through the absolute like nightmare of chasing around notaries and lawyers and be like, hey, what are we doing? Are we waiting? Are we waiting? What's up? What's up? Because
Yeah.
there's a lot of I'll get it to you tomorrow, and then it never comes, right? Like there's a lot of this, and then dealing with a tax authority was
Wow.
I was like, hello, Mr. SAT, which is the IRS equivalent. And I was like, hey, I would like a tax ID so I can give you my money. And they went, we have no available booking slots. I'm like, so what am I? It's silly. It's silly and bureaucratic and slow and inefficient. So ultimately, if you're not in the country and you don't speak the language, you're probably looking at consulting fees like $30,000 to $40,000
Mm.
in getting your business entity up and running, as opposed to, I go online and open a business entity in Delaware in like a week. Like, it's so
Yeah.
different. Um, so there's that's a traditional way. I'm going to go through, I'm going to get my business entity, and I'm just going to do things the right way. You know what? The time to recoup your investment is probably a couple of years. Like, it's going to be rough.
Mm.
Because you still need a Mexican partner to own a little percent of the company, from my understanding. You need a Mexican legal representative. You need someone filing your taxes in country, like all these things. Okay. Second option would be what we do. We basically said it's the simplest solution. Like, it also makes me it almost makes me sound dumb. I said, wait, we have a business entity already for another thing that we were doing. Why don't we import and become the legal importers on record, right?
Mm.
And we can become the sellers, and we can be the distributors. At some point, I would expect the Mexican government to be like, that doesn't seem fair. Like, because it feels like a loophole what we're doing, because we're selling their product on the marketplaces,
Mm.
then charging a commission on it and deducting all expenses and sending the money back. So suddenly, the time to get your ROI back is however long it takes me to sell that inventory. That is so much faster and so much easier. Um, we do expect, and we're already preparing for, eventualities of, like, is that a word? The an event where the government goes, hey, you can't do that anymore. Cool. We have other ways around it. We'll just start buying inventory in that case or whatever as act as traditional distributors. But ultimately, we just act as that bridge where we're saying, listen, you don't have to worry about any of that. Just get us your product to Laredo. We'll sell it. We'll pay you when it sells, and
Yeah.
it's just out of my brain.
Well, the old saying, it's KISS, right? Keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah,
So, I mean,
exactly.
does seem to fit, right? You're already operating, you already have all those things. So why would you go and reinvent the wheel? That seems to make no sense whatsoever for someone coming fresh in the market. We've talked about the changes, we've talked about the hot topics, we've talked about basic business advice, and it seems as though this is the simple way to get into the market. How do people reach out to you? How do they get in touch with you?
So I mistakenly have my personal access to my personal calendar on our website. So if you want to go to golvance.com, that's GOAVANCE, which, funny story, we came up with that name before knowing how to pronounce it. We said, well, avance is progress in Spanish. It sounds really nice. Go, like, it looked nice and written in a nice font. It's like GoVance. I'm like, oh, it looks. How do we say this? So it's govance.com. There's a contact form where you can just book a call on my calendar. I come from an agency background, like I said before, and my partners come from an agency background, which, no, two. Um, and it's just so difficult in the agency space because no matter how good you are, because I know I'm good, sometimes you don't, the product's not a good market fit, or, sometimes you weren't the right person to market it. So there's a lot of tension on all of it, or, expectations aren't there. Like, in the agency space, it is very common for everyone that works within the agency to feel like there's tension between them and the clients.
Mm.
I don't like conflict. I don't like people being mad at me. So the reason that it's my calendar in there is so I can go, hey, this is going to fit or this is not going to fit. Like, I don't want you later. I don't want to tell you something and then later have you be mad at me, because that is so draining. It's literally, the way I say it is, it's literally ROI negative for me to yet sell you something and then have you mad at me and then me be stressed and then not being able to, keep working. So book a call with us. We do a market analysis. We say, hey, this is going to fit. This is not going to fit. This is the price point you want to sell at. This is what your net would look like. Are you comfortable? Cool. Let's move forward. Yeah.
That makes it also very simple too. And I really like that. It's an upfront approach. We can do business. Fine. Let's move forward. And if we can't, we can't. So I appreciate your time and having all the expertise that you have, the changes, the hot topics, the great story and the great name, and a nice, simple solution for business. So I appreciate all the expertise that you shared with us.
Nick, thank you so much, honestly. Thank you for two things. One, letting me come on and talk. And two, not letting me go for too long.
All right. Thank you, sir. We appreciate your time. Thanks for everything that you shared.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a good one.
You too. Well, so if you like the kinds of things that you're hearing, because we all have great opportunities to listen to people and hear what they have to say. If you like the show, make sure that you are liking, subscribing, sharing, and especially positively reviewing on all those social media outlets. That really helps the show to keep on going. So until next time, we'll see you. Thanks for tuning in today. Deus Volt.